So, I know I'm a little bit late. I know. But I had to watch again. And the more I see, the more I'm confirmed about certain things. Brazil they've hit rock bottom. But not only have they hit rock bottom, when you hit rock bottom and all of a sudden you look at yourself and you don't recognize yourself, and maybe this sounds a little bit too philosophical, maybe this sounds like a reference on life, you start analyzing where did we go? Where did I go? How did I get here? And for Brazil, it's been a long time coming. Okay? Brazil has had this for a long time now. Brazil have endured this, and it's finally coming to its fruition now. And I don't mean fruition in a positive sense. Brazil historically have had great players. Now they have good players. 2 very good players. It's crazy that the player that they're missing the most is the player that has created the most controversy over the past years, which is Neymar. And Neymar, I don't even know if I could say that safely with every ounce of conviction I may have. They miss Neymar. But that Neymar, not the one now, if you kind of catch my drift. Because now we're talking about a Neymar that's been injured for nearly 2 years, and God knows how he's going to come back. But the one that I still recollect in my memory banks is the one that I'm talking about. The one that just made defenses crazy. Yeah, he dove. Yeah, he flopped. Yeah, he all that. But he was also able to go around defenses with a great deal of ease, make things very complicated for defenders, made things very complicated for the opposing teams, and of course scored a shit ton of goals. And imagine Brazil without Neymar. Where would have they been without him at this point? I digress. Because you have to go all the way back to 1990. And people say, why 1990? What are you talking about? That was the beginning. That's when the seed was planted initially. 1990 with Sebastião Lazzaroni basically doing a 180 in terms of going from futebol arte, from Socrates and Zico and beautiful football to pragmatism. Now, you can get away with pragmatism when you have Romário, when you have Bebeto, when you have Dunga, when you have Cafu, when you have all these, just a cavalcade of superstars. When you have Ronaldo, when you have Ronaldinho, when you have Adriano, Kaká, when you have Ballon d'Or winners, when you have players that are on ideal 11s all over the world, it's easy to be pragmatic because at times a collective symphony can be created at any moment. A moment of brilliance can come out. A moment of individual brilliance can save you. And it has, and it did for many, 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 many years at Brazil. Not anymore. Tell me which one of the players in Copa America you think was just going to grab the ball, get around 5 defenders, lay off a pass. Rafinha had the most brilliant play of the Copa America, which was that free kick goal against Colombia. Give him credit there. What else? What else did Brazil knock your socks off in terms of their overall performance? No. I think it was something like 24 fouls they committed against Uruguay. 40 plus fouls in total. The match against Uruguay looked more like Brazilian jiu-jitsu than it did an actual football match. You see where I'm talking about, where it's gone to where it is? Right now you could say, hey, by the way, I think they hit rock bottom, and I think now they're starting to realize where they've gotten to. Because I said it a few weeks ago, the difference between Colombia and the way Colombia attacked and the way Brazil attacked is that you had a player that would send passes through lines, that would try and break lines, that would try and go through defenders or go through defensive lines. Brazil would just have go around the perimeter, see if they can go around. Or try and send a cross in. Or something along those lines. They don't have those types of players. Andreas Pereira went and started gloating, hey, by the way, any of these Uruguayan players, right, we're better than them. Or any of these Uruguayan players, they'd love to be playing for us. And then Luis Suarez comes out and says, oh, by the way, the one that's talking about it is George Andarascaeta's backup when he was at Flamengo. A Uruguayan. That was gangster by Luis Suarez, by the way. But like I said, going to 1990 to now, and of course, with the most, I guess you could say they've been in free fall since 2014. They've been in free fall since 2014. Why do I say that? Well, if you analyze it, you see, I mean, and I was at the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, excuse me. The team looked mentally fragile. The team looked that at any moment, anytime somebody would hit them in the jaw, they would be knocked out. And they were. Germany did that. Chile did that a lot of times. Colombia was close to doing it. It seemed like they were on the precipice of just something really bad. And they went into free fall. They had trouble in the group stage in 2014. Croatia, of course, being, you know, they went scoreless against Mexico in Brazil. Give a lot of credit to Memo Ochoa on that one. Something Mexican fans will never do, or probably most of them won't. Their most convincing performance was against Cameroon in that World Cup. Pinilla's post, shot that hits the post, could have ended up being a disastrous, maybe even more than the 7-1. Maybe not. It's a bit of a stretch, but it would be close. Losing to Chile in the round of 16 in a World Cup at home, that's pretty bad. They played Colombia. Colombia drew. Yepes' goal gets disallowed. Colombia were on the verge of equalizing at that point, but again, Colombia turned it on way too late, and they lose 2-1. Then they go and they face Germany. And they just absolutely, and keep in mind, they played Germany without Neymar. They played Germany without Neymar, and Bernard comes in to replace him. From the onset, you knew that it was bad. From the onset, many people had a very eerie feeling about that match. And it was even worse than they thought it was. And that's not me speaking. That's many people that I recall talking about the game from a Brazilian standpoint. They said, we knew that it was going to be bad. We just didn't know it was going to be that bad. It was, for those of you familiar with Rocky movies, it was seeing Apollo Creed get beat up on the ring the way he did. And there was nothing that the fans could do. They just watched in horror as Brazil just got pummeled in front of his fans, in front of their fans. Of course, they end up losing to the Dutch 3-0 as well. In that match, they had nothing. But it was, of course, a third-place match, and that kind of ends up getting lost in the collective memory. But that also showed that Brazil just gave up. Next year after that, they end up being eliminated in the Copa America in the round of, in the quarterfinals to Paraguay. Not only that, they end up getting eliminated by a Paraguay that beats them in penalty shootouts, and they get beat by Paraguay by not even converting on a penalty. I think it was 3-0 or 4-0. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. Following year, of course, they go into the match against Peru. I remember I was on it. I did the match for the World Feed on that occasion. And the goal by Raul Ruiz with his hand. Look, if you're familiar with Gillette Stadium, wherever you see the 300 section, there's a scouting box. I was doing commentary from that scouting box, and I saw the handball from there. The referee didn't. And it took 8 minutes for him to figure it out, and he figured it out wrong. But it's not that. It was everything else that happened. Brazil had no answers. Dunga, who had returned after a few years, ends up getting sacked after that one. And Chiche comes on board shortly, a few months later. Chiche comes on, gives Brazil a bit of serenity, but it's still not enough, unfortunately for Brazil, because they had a very solid side. They get eliminated by Belgium in the quarters of the World Cup. And then, of course, in 2022, they get eliminated by Croatia. And the way they got eliminated by Croatia was just as painful, maybe more painful than the elimination at the hands of Belgium. Because they were just moments away. I mean, they were a few minutes away from winning that match. Brazil were ahead. And then, of course, changing things around the way they did and allowing Croatia to get the equalizer to go into shootouts and eventually lose. And it could have set a semifinal up against Argentina. Then in between, they end up winning a Copa America, but kind of mired in a lot of controversy. And, of course, seeing Jair Bolsonaro raise that trophy ends up kind of being cringy to many Brazil fans and to fans in general, of course. But before that World Cup, Brazil losing to Argentina at Maracanã. Losing the final of the Copa America. That ends up hurting. Then last year, not only do they lose once, not only do they lose twice, they lost 3 times in a row. They've gone in World Cup qualifying. They have gone winless in their last 4. 3 losses. No, they never lost 2 games in a row in World Cup qualifying ever before this World Cup. And not only did they lose 2, they lost 3. And not only did they lose 3 in a row, they lost 1 at home to Argentina. And then they come into this tournament and they crash out the way they did. Rock bottom, folks. Rock bottom. Brazilian coaches are outdated. Brazilian coaches are ultrapassado, as they say in Brazil. They have not offered anything modern in the past 40 years. Tele Santana is as modern as football got in the 80s, and of course when he coached Sao Paulo in the 90s, where he coached arguably one of the best South American teams of the last 40 years. And if you look at that lineup, basically everyone went on to Europe. Half of that team played on the national team. Many world champions, many Champions League winners. Legendary, that Sao Paulo side of the early 90s that actually thrashed Barcelona's dream team. Let's keep in mind that little caveat as well. Tele Santana was it. You had some progressive coaches at some point with Vanderlei Luxemburgo, the Vanderlei Luxemburgo back then of 30 years ago. Not the Vanderlei Luxemburgo of today. Maybe, just maybe, the Luis Felipe Scolari of 30 years ago. Not the Luis Felipe Scolari at 74, 75 now. Many coaches were progressive in terms of football in the 90s, in the 80s. The sad part is that they're still coaching today. Now, I'm not saying it in sounding like I'm all in favor of ageism. I'm not. I'm just saying that those coaches remained in the ideas of back then and never modernized into now. And in part, football in Brazil has a lot to do with that. The urgency to win at all costs. Win at all costs. If you're a coach and you sign a contract, you do well, yeah, cool, no problem. But if you lose a match, if you lose 2, if you lose 3, you're basically gone. And bring in another coach. There have been teams in Brazil that have sacked a coach, coach number 1, okay? Just so you know. Bring in coach number 2, sack coach number 2. Bring in coach number 3, sack coach number 3, and hire back coach number 1. That's how Brazilian, they have money, so then, a lot of them throw and see what sticks. But they have so much more money than the rest of all of America that they have the luxury, they have the capacity to hire and sign the best players. And in all of that, you bring in a great youth system. And in your urgency to earn, to generate revenue, your young little superstars, you end up selling them to Europe at 16, 17 years of age. Are some ready? Maybe a small handful. If it weren't for Brazilian rules, well, they would have left at 15. And I can tell you stories about kids that are 9 and 10 that currently have agents in Brazil. So all of this that I'm telling you, it has a purpose, because sometimes what's underneath ends up seeping in to the surface. And that's the big problem with Brazilian football. Yeah, you could say that the players aren't as good and the tactics aren't there. Keep in mind that in Brazil, of course, kind of bringing things back a little bit, the best coaches are foreign coaches. Abel Ferreira is the one that is with the most tenure, a Portuguese coach, the coach of Palmeiras. Now basically going on 4.5 years as coach of Palmeiras. At the end of the day, when all is said and done, what ends up being more important than the product itself? the profit. Sounds familiar to many of you in North America? Well, that is a problem in Brazil because, like I said before, long gone are the days where feeling football ends up being important. It's about playing, and many that play now don't feel. And in Brazil, no longer do you have a style of play that represents what the players feel inside. For many, it sounds, mystical and, very out there. But there's something to it. Because some of these people are represented by football. Keep in mind, this is what's kept them alive. This is what's given them a why in life. This is what's been able to keep families together in certain situations. So it does represent, and it does bring a certain youthfulness to them. And Marcelo Bielsa was right the other day because it's a source of happiness to many that can't buy happiness or can't find things that offer them happiness. Maybe, just maybe, I am going off a couple of branches too far. But football's seen differently than just X's and O's, dollar signs, euro signs, whatever. For many, it is that. And as the money encroached more into football, that aspect of it was taken away. Not always. No. I mean, it would be unfair to say it's just that. But the identification of a player with a game ends up being important. And in Brazil, that's been lost. Look at how mechanical Brazil look now. How robotic they look now. How automatic they look now. When at first people admired Brazil because of their spontaneity and creativity, no longer do you have that in Brazilian football because that aspect of the game was taken away from them. That's what I'm talking about. And it takes a lot more than just, be creative. No, it isn't just, be creative again. No, it's you take out an essence of that kid trying to solve problems in their mind using the tools that they have at their disposal that you, developmental coach, that you, FA, that you, professionalism, ends up taking away because it's no longer satisfactory to them. Brazil playing without a number 10 ends up being almost preposterous. Brazil don't play with anyone in the middle anymore. Brazil can't find a way to kind of dribble through players and find passes to connect and make some beautiful combinations to be able to finish off beautifully like they did back in the 80s and 70s and 90s and early 2000s. You don't have that anymore because that's been stripped from the essence of football in Brazil. Because what's more important? Well, we win, we drop back. We got to win because if not, my ass is on the line. Our asses are on the line. If I don't win this weekend, my job's done, and therefore I have to drop back everybody. That's how Brazil plays now. Although you go to Copacabana Beach, you go to the favelas, you go all the way up north to the northeast of Brazil, and there's still that essence. But at the end of the day, man, people identify more with what's going on in the beaches of Brazil than on the pitches in Brazil. And that's where football is failing Brazil right now. When they do start looking at it and say, hey, man, we have to return to that. We have to go back to our roots. That's when Brazil could start to get dangerous again. But as of right now, they're also Rans. Share. Make sure you stay tuned. I'll have more. Hopefully, everything gets better with Brazilian fans because, of course, Brazil, always a protagonist. And keep in mind, also, one more thing. Brazil might not qualify for a World Cup because they find themselves sixth in South American qualifying. Who would have thunk that? How ironic, knowing that now there's 48 teams, and when there's 48, Brazil has a chance of not getting in. Well, think about it.